Hi, this is David Allen Lambert. I'm your virtual historian along with Terry O'Connell, and we're here with virtualhistorians.com for another exciting episode. And because we got such great feedback on Professor Bob Stone's visit before, we wanted to include another visit, but talk about other things he's involved in: marine archaeology and virtual reality. So strap on your headset and tune in as we talk with Professor Stone. Welcome back, Bob. It's so nice to have you with us for another episode.
Great pleasure to be back, David and Terry. Yes, thank you for tolerating me yet again.
The pleasure is completely ours to have you back. And I know that one of the things we had talked about briefly before we taped the previous episode was these subnets. And a lot of people don't think of subnets, but you have to go back to the era of World War II, where the U-boats were invasive as part of, you think of the Battle of Britain, but we also had to worry about the German U-boats coming into the ports. And you discovered some of these nets that supposedly had been lost or thought to have been removed.
Well, they actually didn't realize or a lot of the locals and the villagers didn't realize they were there. And yes, I mean, Plymouth Sound, obviously, with the naval base, was protected by these anti-torpedo nets, literally draped across most of the harbour and most of the big estuary of the River Tamar and the River Plym. What we hadn't realised, however, is that some of those nets were used to protect one of the dams at the north of Plymouth, protecting or holding in what is Burrator Reservoir. And Burrator Reservoir has been a great place for us in terms of history, in terms of finding 15th century houses and all kinds of old Great Western Railway lines that we've recreated using virtual reality. But this discovery was one of the highlights of my virtual heritage career, if I can call it that. And what we found was we were trying to recreate what the area looked like before it was flooded to provide all the water for Plymouth. Going back into the Mayflower project that we discussed in the last episode, it was for a long time just small man-made channels called leats that were delivering water into Plymouth. Of course, they got polluted, they got frozen up in the winter, and Plymouth couldn't cope anymore. So they built this huge reservoir in the late 1800s. And they flooded this wonderful valley. And obviously, there were properties there that were lost. As you find in the UK, and I'm sure it's probably true in the US as well, there are lots of myths about lost villages in man-made lakes and reservoirs. This one hasn't got a village. It's literally got a farmhouse and some track and an old bridge. But we wanted to recreate that. So we teamed up with a Cornish company who brought along their autonomous robot surface vessel. And this robot surface vessel was set to scan, as you'll see in fact in one of the videos that I provided you with, set to scan the reservoir on the surface with this high definition sonar. We took the sonar and converted it into a virtual reality model of the topography of the bottom of the reservoir. And yes, we were able to line that up with the 1800s map, and we could match literally one for one the foundations of the farmhouse, the path between the two villages, the old bridge. The detail from this virtual reality converted sonar map was fantastic. Getting back to your question, there is an end to this. Getting back to your question, we found a series of very sort of spherical, smooth blips that were going across the breadth of the reservoir, quite close to the dam. We had no idea what these were. And this is one of the things I love about heritage. When we give presentations, we find that certainly older members of society will send us things like photographs or postcards that they've kept in their shoeboxes under their beds for years and years. And this lady sent me this picture. And on this picture, which was of the reservoir from a distance, I could make out two little black lines of what looked like little blips. And I thought, this is really interesting. So we did some more research. We went to the National Archives. We looked into things like Barnes Wallis and how he invented the bouncing bomb. All this stuff, all these declassified papers came out. And then we found a picture from a drought back in the 1950s or 60s, I think it was, where there were these like 5 or 6 spherical objects on the side of the lake. Well, what's that? More research, torpedo nets. So what they've done is, because the Germans have been doing full reconnaissance of the area, possibly to try and take the dam out, they would have used torpedoes, not bouncing bombs, because they didn't have them. They put these torpedo nets in place. So we thought, this is great. So we took one of our little, we've got a little tiny ROV, remotely operated submersible, called a Trident. And we dived it into Burrowton Reservoir with permission. After about 45 minutes, one of these 4-foot diameter spheres came out of the murk, sitting on a pile of, if you can imagine medieval chainmail, but with 17-inch diameter, they call grommets. So there's like a chainmail net of grommets on which this sphere was sitting. And that was my Titanic moment. We proved that they were down there. Nobody in the locality knew that they were down there. And for just 45 minutes, we'd found them.
It's amazing. That's amazing. You know, and I think that one of the things with Titanic is that we've all, remember back, if you were alive then, back to 1985 when Robert Ballard and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute found that first boiler. So that was your boiler moment, essentially.
Yeah.
There must be some really amazing places that you would love to investigate. I mean, I know that obviously for shipwrecks, depth and currents, I know that, I think the Lusitania is hard to actually get to because of the murkiness in the depth. But there must be some vessels that you have gone to see, or subs and whatnot. Do you want to share any of those stories with us?
Yeah, sure. One of my favorite projects is recreating the wreck of the HMS or HM submarine A7. Now, the A-class submarines were the first submarines to be actually built in England. Up to then, they were using the American design of the Holland submarines. So the A-class submarines, of which there were many, were built in England. Now, the A7 never saw active service. It was January 1914, which is like months before World War I broke out. She was carrying out simulated torpedo runs on her mother, the depot ship, the mothership, if you like. Dived and was never seen again, and lost with all 12 hands on board. It's a very strange situation, because when they found her and they tried to raise her, she was 30 degrees bow up with 20 meters of her stern stuck in the clay on the bottom. So what they think had happened is these were very unstable submarines. They tried to dive, the thing went unstable, the stern hit the clay, and the torpedoes sucked her further in.
Oh.
What we did was we teamed up with a Southwest company, or Southwest charity actually, called, and they got permission to dive on the wreck, because obviously it's not a war grave, but it's a protected vessel because of the bodies on board. And they were bringing up little sort of video snippets and photographs and that, and we were able to show people what the submarine looks like today. So in the video that you'll be able to see on your website, you'll see that we can not only can we show what the submarine looked like with its running bridge, the binnacle, which was the compass in the stern, and all the other features of it when it was pristine, but what it looks like today with everything that's been torn away. Anchors have ripped things, nets. The thing was covered in nets when the divers went down. But again, this is what virtual reality to me is all about. It's making the invisible visible. There's no way we can get down there as members of the public or school kids. But equally, and this is just one example of many, that the local people, as with the Torpedo Net project, didn't know she was down there. The local people of Plymouth, even things like the Plymouth Council, did not know that 100 meters off the famous breakwater that you can see in Plymouth Sound was the UK, and it's still there, the UK's first ever underwater habitat, actually developed for £1,000, whilst Jacques Cousteau and the Sea Lab 1, Sea Lab 2 guys over in the States were building tens of thousands of dollars underwater habitats. We recreated this habitat, which is literally, it was like a 2-ton, it was about 2.2 meters in diameter. It was like a huge oil drum that this guy, Colin Irwin, who we found, pay £1,000 and spend a week down there.
Wow.
UK's first ever habitat. It's still there. Nobody knew about it, and sadly, nobody cares.
Oh, that's a shame. Well, I know I actually remember hearing about these, and I think back, if you think into the space program, how important, because that's recreating as close to conditions as you can without actually being in outer space. At that point, it's well before the space station and Skylab and things like that. That's amazing. Is there anything on the radar, no pun intended, that you're looking to perhaps investigate or hope there's funding, or the next project on the horizon, Bob?
Yeah, there are a couple. We do a lot of work with the UK Ministry of Defence, and we've got a very good relationship with the Royal Marines down in Plymouth. And one of the things that when we've been out testing our little submersibles, we occasionally come across very interesting looking installations that are built into the cliffside around the coast of Plymouth and going into Cornwall. And one of those installations is a place called Pier Cellars. I discovered that it's currently used by the Marines for training, but it used to be one of a number of testing facilities for the old Brennan torpedo. The old Brennan torpedo was actually a wire-guided torpedo that had gyroscopes on board, operated by wires that you tug, the machine would tug left and right to actually guide it through the water. Now, this was a Brennan torpedo testing station. And if we're lucky, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, sometime in June, the Royal Marines are going to take us to that establishment with our 3D scanner. And then within a couple of hours, we'll have been able to build up a 3D scan of the insides of this facility in much the same way as we did, for example, in some of the tunnels on the old military installation on Drake's Island, the famous Drake's Island, which is also in Plymouth Sound. So that's next on the horizon for us.
That's amazing. Terry, I know that you have been taking all this in. You must have some questions or comments that you want to toss out.
So one, I love that you brought up Jacques Cousteau, because as you were talking, that's all I could think about was being a little kid watching Jacques Cousteau on TV with my dad, and I thought he was fascinating. And I just wonder, like, what he would think today, all this, because we could do so much more, right? Before it was whatever their small little camera captured, but now we're getting just so much more. So I don't know. It just really took me back to being a child.
I think Jacques Cousteau would be quite angry, because I think Jacques Cousteau would be one of those people who would be saying, look, come on, guys, why are we thinking about another lunar base? Why are we thinking about going to Mars? We haven't been able to even get people on the sea, which is one of our richest sources of food. So I think he would be quite miffed. Especially with the condition of the seas. I mean, thankfully we've got people like David Attenborough, who's constantly challenging what's going on with our climate. But the virtual reality, to me, I mean, the great thing about virtual reality, and I've said this again, is that when I present and I've presented in the most strange village halls, an abandoned church on Dartmoor. We've presented in the most strange places you could imagine. But when we get people of all ages, I'm talking about children who are 7, 8. I'm talking about men and women who are in their 90s. They get it. They come along because it's what I call heritage on their doorstep. It's something that is down the road from them, around the corner from them. They actually get it. And the great thing about it is that when we present to them, as I mentioned earlier, and the presentation is finished, I still get postcards. I still get old black and white photographs. These people will send me these things, which adds to the accuracy of our virtual reality models that would never have happened unless we presented, and would have probably ended up being thrown away when the person passed away. And that's what virtual reality is so clever at doing.
In Massachusetts, we have something called the Quabbin Reservoir. And when I was a kid, you'd walk along the edges of the reservoir and you'd find bricks or fragments of pottery and things like that. And the reason was because there were 3 drowned towns down there: Enfield, Dana, and one other that is escaping me right at the moment. It may have been even more. So back in the 1930s, they needed a reservoir for Boston. So they basically, by eminent domain, purchased all these farms, moved all these cemeteries. I always say they moved the stones and not the bones. So here's drinking to your ancestors. But the idea of the foundations of so many of these churches and stone walls, because New England is dotted with stone walls like hedgerows in England. And I think underwater, I mean, I know it's a reservoir for drinking, but how much it would be amazing to kind of virtually drain or to see with virtual reality what it's like down there. I think it would be amazing to know what's still there.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's one of the on-land areas we've done in the Burrator Reservoir area, which was most of the estate of which was flooded in the second raising of the dam in the 1920s. It's something called Longstone Manor. Now we've flown drones over Longstone Manor. We've converted the drone video into 3D. And we've got some recreations of what the manor house looked like, but that's only part of the story. When you look at the old sketches, and this manor house goes back to the 15th century. You've got this wonderful estates where they were undertaking archery. They had horses and carriages, bringing the gentry, and it's all underwater. And this one exercise of taking this robot vessel and to be able to correlate what's down there now with what was on the 1800s map, it just opens so many opportunities.
It's pretty amazing what we're at the tip of the iceberg in this technology. I mean, we were talking in the last episode how you, in conjunction with a gentleman from NASA in 1987, I mean, that's only 34 years ago. I mean, to think where we'll be in another 30 years. I mean, they'll be looking at this as kind of like the Edison gramophone of technology. I mean, where do you think the VR technology is going down the road if you were to kind of be a visionary to look at where we're going with this?
I've been asked that twice in the last 30 years, and both times I've got it wrong. but I think virtual reality will become commonplace, for example, in healthcare. I also think that virtual reality will become commonplace in education. And I think this is where heritage and virtual history really has a big role to play. Because even today, because certainly in the UK, where we've got crazy health and safety laws, you got to be very so careful with children, taking them on virtual field trips, taking them back in time, getting them to meet with virtual actors that haven't existed for centuries. I think that's going to revolutionize applications like engineering and defense and even to some extent healthcare. Yeah, they'll come along. But I think exploitation of this technology for our future generations and get them interested in history, but using creative technologies. I was lucky. I did quite well at history at school. I didn't pursue it. You were mentioning earlier the U-boats. I remember in my exams, I had to do an essay on U-boats. But if we were able to go back and, for example, the American Liberty ship, the SS James Egan Lane, it was torpedoed by a U-boat and sank in the coastal shallows just around the corner from Plymouth, where I was brought up. We have a recreation of that wreck, the James Egan Lane. It's quite close to another wreck, the Scylla, which is again is a video that you'll have on your website. But we've also got a recreation of the submarine as it was positioned relative to where the James Egan Lane sank. Now, show that to kids. Show that to me when I was in my teens doing my original exams. I would remember it. I would remember every second of it.
Well, I think so many people are visual learners anyways. I mean, it's one thing to read something out of a textbook, if I read the Domesday Book, but if you virtually build what that part of the Domesday Book looked like, where that farm was or where that structure may have been. I mean, to me, I think even as I've gotten further educated, I still like that visual overlay. I mean, and I think what your videos are going to prove to people is there's just so much further ways we can investigate history. And I really appreciate you coming on and giving us a little bit more of the backstory on some of the things that you've been involved in. And I really hope that you'll come back again, because it doesn't sound like you're done with this yet.
Absolutely not. No, I think I kind of took semi-retirement back in 2019, but then discovered that no, I still enjoy flying drones over old buildings. There's literally one that's 5 minutes from where I live at the moment in Droitwich, which has history going back to King Henry VIII that I'm going to be involved in. And there is a lot to do. When you think of our two countries, the amount of heritage and the amount of hidden heritage that's out there, there's an enormous amount to do, and it's wide open.
Well, I mean, I just wish we had this technology when Sutton Hoo was being dug up. And even though that was done correct, think of all the archaeological sites that haven't been done correct in hundreds of years.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Well,
I think we would definitely love to have you back to talk about the building in Henry VIII, because that would be amazing.
Absolutely.
That'll be a pleasure. Yes, it's early days. It's just been listed. The local Droitwich Spa Town Council are due to be putting scaffolding up this month, sometime this month, May. And again, with my colleague in Canada who was helping with build the medieval shorefront for Mayflower, he's involved in helping us recreate that as well, because again, it's one of these areas, it's one of these buildings that has so much history but so few records that actually exist. So it's the interpretation is going to be done so carefully. But love to come back. Yes, please.
Excellent.
Love it. Thank you.
Well, another episode with Professor Bob Stone. I hope you've enjoyed it. And again, we'll always have links to his website and to the videos that he's talked about, so you can tune in that way. Well, until the next time, I'm virtually yours, and so is Terry. We are your virtual historians, and you can find out more at virtualhistorians.com. And thanks again for tuning in. Until next time.
For those of you watching on YouTube, remember you can also find us on the audio podcast of your choice. Currently, we can be found on Anchor, Breaker, Castbox, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher. And for those of you listening on audio, remember you can always find the full video recording on our YouTube channel. If you like this episode, please feel free to leave a comment on the website or on YouTube. As always, you can find us at virtualhistorians.com. You can email us at info@virtualhistorians.com. And we ask that you please like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you.